Hello, Delaware Valley. I'm Brian Dougherty, and I'm the host of the Philly Business Spotlight Hour. And here on WWDB, and every week we do an expert guest segment called Ask the Expert. And the gentleman that we have this week is a gentleman by the name of Brian Kelly. He's the principal of a company called Cost Management Solutions, or CMS as he refers to it. They're a company that specializes in helping other companies to utilize the full benefit of what is known as the Work Opportunity Tax Credit Program, or the WWDB program for short. This is a program that helps disadvantaged U.S. citizens to gain employment. At the same time, it helps businesses to reduce their tax burden by hiring them. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. We look forward to being on it, so thank you.
No problem. Listen, it's great having you on. I mean, been a little bit since we touched base. Sorry, yesterday I had a bunch of appointments, and I wanted to call you back, but I was glad I got your email. But anyway, in going through, like, of course, every week I'm doing research to try to really dig into what it is you do, you know, I want to jump into that, but before we do, can you give us a little background on yourself? What led you up to this business, and what was your main purpose for going into it? Sure.
Well, first of all, we started this our WWDB tax credit business actually over 20 years ago. It's been 21 years, and we got into the Work Opportunity Tax Credit business because most employers or most businesses don't even know it exists. So the more I talk to people about the program, the more we realize we have to educate people first on it. And then once they understand it, then it's like, okay, who can perform this service for us? So we built our business of basically automating the process and helping employers maximize the federal tax credit benefits.
Well, you know, I'll tell you, going through it, trying to wrap my head around it, one of the things I thought was fascinating on your website was you actually have a calculator, right?
Right, exactly.
The WWDB tax savings calculator. But the one question that jumped out to me is obviously I get an idea of, you know, obviously you have the number of hires per year in there. These are the different variables, right? And then you have qualifying new hires, and then you have average tax credit amount, which I can get. But what is the qualifying ratio?
Okay. So what's real interesting is after doing this program for businesses for 20 years, we realized that 15% of all new hires will typically qualify under this program. So if I have to make an estimate of what we can save a potential client, we can say, okay, how many people do you hire per year? So in some cases, it might be 100 people. And we know statistically that 15% of them are going to qualify, so that would be 15 people per year. And you're right, our average tax credit is around $2,400. That's the one we use as a variable there. So that would be $36,000 in tax credit savings that we can provide to an employer.
I mean, I'll tell you, you hit the nail on the head. I'm certain very few employers know about this. And I really encourage any employers to go to your website and check it out. I mean, it's the CMSWOTC.com, right?
You got it, Brian. Yes.
And but, you know, again, okay, so one of the words that gets thrown around a lot with this is qualifying, right?
Sure.
So jumping into that a little, who exactly does qualify?
Okay. So there's really 10 categories. There's people that are receiving state or federal assistance like TANF and SNAP. SNAP is food stamps, by the way. There's the Vow to Hire Heroes program. So if we're hiring military personnel that has been discharged from service, that would be a new hire that we can bring on board and obtain a tax credit for it. We have some companies that use a lot of ex-felons. We have a bakery in New York, a commercial bakery that hires hundreds of people per year, and they basically hire ex-felons for those services, so getting them into the workforce, that would be a category. And then there's some rural zones, some basically areas around the country, federal designated areas around the country, that if an employee lives in that respective area, would qualify. So there's about 10 different categories, Brian.
Well, I look in here. I mean, it's amazing. They really do now narrow it down. They have long-term unemployment recipients, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people that have been on the SNAP program, right? The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
Exactly.
You know,
so let's talk about that, Brian. Let's talk about that a little bit, because we know statistically, and there's all kinds of labor reports that's showing that there's anywhere between 41 million people and 44 million people still receiving state and federal benefits like TANF and SNAP, which are food stamps. And what's more interesting is we're on a really low unemployment rate right now. We're the lowest unemployment rate we've been in 30 years, right?
Right.
So we're trying to get these people off these state and federal programs and back into the workforce. And this program is perfectly designed for that, because it's giving employers the incentive to hire those people and give them federal tax credit dollars for hiring them.
I mean, the other thing is, and this kind of hits home for me, the SSI recipient. I mean, I have a nephew who's been on SSI since he was 9. He's 31 now. Honestly, and this is kind of at the heart of why I really wanted to have you on, you know, the kid's biggest problem, he's very high functioning, is getting and holding a job. And, you know, literally his whole life revolves around wanting to do that. And not one time in, you know, his lifetime has anybody mentioned to our family anything about this program. You're saying, how long's it been around?
Well, what's interesting is this program actually goes back to the Reagan administration back in the early 80s, and it used to be called the Targeted Jobs Tax Credit Program. So every legislation, every president has kind of molded the tax credit a little differently and the incentive a little differently, and they've called it their own names. So the program itself has been around for, 30, 40 years under different names and different tax credit availabilities.
Well, that's a pretty long time, and, to not know about it. So I definitely think it's about time that the word got out there. But, one question I like to ask the expert a lot of times is, who's your ideal client? I
think it's all businesses. First of all, if the business is a C Corp and an S Corp or LLC, they'll qualify. But it's employers that are hiring really entry-level people. So folks that might work in a restaurant, a distribution center, construction work. I mean, it's all crosses of life. But if you really think about it, the people that would probably qualify into the program are going to be entry-level people.
Well, let me ask you this, and I guess this kind of gets to the nitty-gritty of it a little bit. I would have to think most people would think these are going to be more menial type jobs, but I would have to think qualifying veterans. There's some people on this list, some qualified, folks that wouldn't necessarily have to be in that category. Am I right?
You're perfectly right, and that is one of the employers that we service is a major corporation across the United States, and they specifically hire military vets or people that have been discharged from services. And in all candor, they do very, very well with the WWDB tax credits because they are hiring those, high-level military people.
Yeah, and, I know here this is a sensitive one probably for a lot of people, but even the idea of an ex-felon, I know a gentleman, who was a doctor. And, with all the medications out there and prescribing, and got, went hung up in the wrong road with that. And, but he's an extremely high functioning person, do you see any types of cases like this?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said earlier, there's, I can point to businesses that we service around the country that really focus on hiring people that, are, in trouble and came out and want to get back into the workforce and be a responsible adult again. And actually, we just wrote a blog a couple weeks ago on really the ex-felons and how they really want to work. They really want to get their lives back together. And again, this is another program to incentivize the employer for hiring them.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to think, and you know, you'd have to think that might be the overlooked area, you know, yeah, because it just, you know, because most of this, like vocational rehabilitation referral, this type of thing, you know, some of these people, you may not be as educated. Some people might have a mental handicap or something along those lines. So maybe, you know, less comprehensive jobs would be the obvious solution. But obviously not for all of them.
That's correct.
So,
yeah, and I like how you're telling the story about the different tax credits, but it all comes down to the people and really getting these people back into the workforce. I mean, that's really the structure of this program.
Well, you know, on that note, you know, one of the things I usually ask is, and it's on that question bank I sent you, what inspired you to start providing these types of services? So, I mean, I think you kind of hit on it a little there.
Yeah, absolutely. So back 30 years ago, when I was a little younger, I was responsible for creating best practices with CPA firms, and we basically did a road show. And I was in the payroll industry at the time, so we were talking about payroll tax legislation and working with the large CPA firms in the area. And one of the areas that came up was this, you know, jobs tax credit. And the more I spoke about it in these seminars and in these events, the more I realized nobody knew anything about the program. So that was the essence of why we started the service, and now we're servicing thousands of employers, and we're saving a lot of people a lot of money.
Well, I'll tell you, the other thing too, I kind of wanted to hit on after looking at your site, you're kind of drilling down on it. You have this partnership opportunities. Opportunity, right? Become a strategic partner, a business partner. So what's that all about?
So we work with CPA firms and consulting firms that deal in tax credits throughout the United States. And we like to create strategic partners with those CPA firms and with those tax advisory services. And, you know, one of the things is a question that comes to us a lot: why doesn't the CPA just do it? Or why doesn't, the consultant just do it for me? And the reality is you have to screen every new hire that comes on board, and you have to ask them those respective questions, which can be quite sensitive. So we do all the heavy lifting, we do all the screening of every new hire, and then what we do is we provide the CPA firm the tax credits we obtained for that employer. So it's a nice partnership. Well,
that, you know, another thing about that, so you kind of hit on something. One thing I've heard from folks is that the process, and we've heard this, like, you know, with many government type programs, it's kind of lengthy, and it takes a good bit of work to get someone through the system of. What exactly is that process?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah, it's a pain in the neck.
I didn't want to say it, but
the Fed and the Department of Labor doesn't make it easy to retain these tax credits. That's reality. So what we do is we have two different mechanisms. We actually have a whole technology arm with a web browser that is plugged into a company's onboarding process. So they go through the screening process of, you know, if they're eligible or if they take advantage of, if any of the recipients are qualified under one of those categories. So we have a whole technology arm that provides an onboarding system approach. We also have a 24/7 call center. So for smaller businesses that don't want to use technology, they have their new hires call into our call center, and we screen the employees, or we ask them those sensitive questions to determine if they're eligible for the tax credit. And if they are, then we submit everything electronically to the respective state Department of Labor to obtain those validations and certificates. So it's a whole process, Brian.
And you kind of have all the I's dotted and T's crossed through an electronic process through, I guess, over the years you've developed.
Yeah, exactly. And we've tweaked it a number of times And our whole goal is to really make the process as simple as possible for the employer and for the employee. We don't want it to be a burden. So we actually rephrase the questions that are being asked so that they make sense to people. So we get a higher yes or higher qualification rate because we're so granular.
Well, Brian, I have to tell you, this is an extremely important topic. I appreciate your time coming on here to do this. I really advocate this program to anybody who's out there who's hiring employees. How can people get in touch with you?
They can either call our 1-800 number, 1-800-517-9099, or we have tons of information. We just released a beautiful video that explains the WWDB program. It educates people and how to get in touch with us, and that's on our webpage, and that's www.cmswotc.com.
Well, thank you so much for coming out. Hopefully we can have you back on another time, and look forward to doing it again.
Well, I appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for reaching out to us.
No problem. So this is Brian Dougherty. I'm your host of the Philly Business Spotlight Hour. This is on WWDB 860 AM. Before we go to our